expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Hello and welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Nancy Cordes. Well, after last night's primaries, the Tea Party has all the momentum with another round of primary knockouts in Delaware and New York, and a close battle still going on in New Hampshire. We're going to go to Wilmington, Delaware now, though, where Christina Ruffini is on the ground with a report on the surprise victory for insurgent Tea Party candidate Christine O'Donnell, who defeated the party-backed candidate Mike Castle. Take a look.
Hi, Nancy. We're here in Wilmington, Delaware, where Democratic Senate hopeful Chris Coons is going to make a campaign appearance in about an hour. Now, Chris Coons is having a pretty good day because last night, longtime Delaware politician Mike Castle lost the Republican nomination to Tea Party-backed candidate Christine O'Donnell. Castle has been around Delaware politics for almost 20 years. He's a former governor. He's a moderate. He's very, very popular in the state, and this was one of those seats that the Republicans were expected to pick up in the fall. So when Christine O'Donnell started making a run for the nomination, the Republicans not only didn't support her, they attacked her, and they really threw their weight behind Mike Castle. But it didn't do any good. Her campaign kept picking up momentum, fueled by those tea-soaked dollars. She got the Sarah Palin endorsement, and that was just enough to edge out Mike Castle and cinch the nomination last night. We talked to a couple Republicans today who said even though they've been longtime voters of Republican candidates here in the state, they are unsure about Christine O'Donnell, and they might switch parties. One man said, I just don't support her, and I'll be voting for Chris Coons in the fall. So this presents a real problem for Republicans who, like I said, were supposed to win this state. This race, which was pretty much a home run for them, is now anybody's game. Nancy?
Staying in Delaware now, Christine O'Donnell's surprise victory might be the big headline out of last night's primaries, but as you heard Christina mention, she faces an uphill battle against her opponent in the general election, New Castle County Executive Chris Coons, who's already leading in several statewide polls today. Chris joins me now via phone, and Mr. Coons, you must feel like you've got a new lease on life. Tell us what your last 24 hours have been like.
Well, thanks for a chance to be on with you today, Nancy. I've been running for the U.S. Senate here in Delaware for 6 months. And I've been going up and down the state and listening to Delaware's families and hearing their concerns, their anxiety, their anger about losing their jobs or losing their homes, their concerns about not being able to pay their bills, and their anger at Washington and wanting someone who will go to Washington to fix what's broken. I don't think that's changed from yesterday to today. The race that I'm running, the issues that I want to address, the things that I want to bring to the fight to make America strong again are exactly the same, regardless of who my Republican opponent is.
Still, though, we do know that the polls had showed you trailing behind Mike Castle, who had held statewide office for 20 years. The National Democratic Party seemed to be pretty pessimistic about reclaiming the seat based on his statewide visibility. And now they're much more optimistic. Are you getting calls from Democrats in Washington saying we're going to give a lot more money, a lot more resources to your campaign?
Well, Nancy, you're right. Congressman Castle served Delaware for 30 years as a statewide elected official. I called him last night to thank him for his service. He has been a decent and honorable public servant who's worked very hard for the people of Delaware. And he's part of a long tradition here of electing moderate and independent and effective folks and sending them to represent us in Washington. I have gotten a lot of calls from people who are excited about my campaign, folks who've supported me from the beginning but are re-energized. And I think there is a very strong chance that I'll be Delaware's next senator. But I don't take anything for granted. The reality is, Nancy, that the folks here in Delaware, like people all over this country, want to know who's got real ideas for moving the country forward, and they're looking for candidates with experience, with values, and with concrete proposals. That's what I'm focusing on today.
Let's talk about that experience for a moment. As I mentioned earlier, you're the New Castle County Executive. You have been for 6 years. That's one of Delaware's 3 counties. But this seems like the kind of year where the prevailing sentiment among a lot of voters is, hey, throw all the bums out. So how do you highlight that experience without being lumped in as part of the establishment?
Well, Nancy, I spent 8 years working in one of Delaware's most innovative manufacturing companies before being elected county executive. And I ran for county executive because we had a local government here that was badly off track. There was a lot of wasteful spending. There was corruption issues, and I tackled fixing that. I represent 2/3 of our state population, more than 500,000 people, and I've made tough choices to cut spending, to rein in our budget, to balance our budget, and to deliver great services to help strengthen and support our police, our paramedics, to deliver better parks and libraries, and to work closely with our local business community to help them bring people back to work in our community. That's the kind of experience, hands-on, practical experience, making local government work for folks that I think will resonate with Delawareans who want a fresh face, some new energy and experience, but who also has the capability, the competence to go to Washington and tackle what's wrong there.
I want to talk about your opponent for a moment, because already on your website you are claiming that she's someone with some odd conspiracy theories, perhaps not suited to represent Delaware. Everyone assumed that Congressman Castle was going to handily defeat her, and now we all know how that turned out. Can you afford to underestimate her?
Oh, I don't take anything for granted, Nancy, and I respect and will debate and deal, I think, respectfully with my Republican opponent. It's important for Delawareans to have a chance through public debates and through other opportunities to learn about our records and to learn about our policy ideas. And I'm going to do my level best to keep this campaign focused on what matters most, fixing Washington and making it work better for the people of Delaware.
There's some back and forth going on right now, as you know, in the Republican Party about how much money they're going to give her, what kind of support they're going to give her, because some people don't consider her a viable candidate. But as we've all seen, no matter how much money the Republican Party gives her, the Tea Party is backing her, and the Tea Party Express has some pretty deep pockets. What does your fundraising apparatus look like right now? How much money do you have in the bank?
I've got close to $1 million that I've raised, mostly from Delawareans. And frankly, Nancy, I think folks in Delaware didn't respond very well to the flurry of people from all over the country coming in during the primary and sort of telling them which way to vote and trying to press the outcome one way or the other. This is a campaign that really ought to focus on meeting Delaware's real needs. There are national issues at stake. Obviously, a senator votes on, makes decisions on critical issues to our country as a whole, and has to be ready to step up and take on a very serious job. But Delaware is a place that has always had a very civil political community. We respect each other. We know each other. It is so small that it's really a state of neighbors. And I think it's important to folks in Delaware that I stay focused on their needs and their concerns.
Democrat Chris Coons, suddenly half of one of the most heavily watched races in the country. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Washington Unplugged today.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for a chance to be with you.
Finally, this year's midterms are ending much the way they began, with outsiders taking the establishment to task. For Republicans, though, the question is, will the Tea Party's success help or hurt their chances of taking back Congress in November? Let's go now to our Director of Elections, Anthony Salvanto, up in New York, who's been keeping tabs on all these races overnight. Anthony, what a night.
How are you, Nancy? Yes, it was. Pretty late, too, if you're up waiting for some New Hampshire results that haven't finished up yet.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure you're bleary-eyed as I am this morning. So what do we make of these Tea Party victories in this last big primary push, 7 states holding their votes last night?
Well, you know, certainly as Christina pointed out, in Delaware, there's a couple of gears turning here. The first one in Delaware, where you subtract Mike Castle from the equation in a seat that the Republicans clearly had their eye on for a pickup for some months. Mike Castle, of course, having won statewide office so many times, looked like the kind of guy who could overcome what is sort of a natural Democratic advantage in the state with a registration edge and a tendency to vote for Democratic candidates. So now with him out, the Senate race really becomes a better chance for the Democrats to hold. Remember, that's Joe Biden's old seat, and it remains to be seen which way that'll go. We'll see some polls, I'm sure, come out very soon. But certainly the Democrats probably feel better about their chances. Now, what happens then is it complicates the math for Republicans going forward throughout the rest of the country and trying to pick up the 10 Senate seats that they need to try and take back the chamber.
Okay, so now that the primaries are over, break it down for us. How many Tea Party candidates defeated Republican establishment candidates in Senate primaries? How many defeated establishment Republicans in governor primaries? And what's that going to mean for November?
Well, the second question is really interesting, because I think you're seeing now the question of whether you can take a very concentrated, very enthusiastic movement like the Tea Party, which has clearly had success in a lot of races coast to coast, and we can rattle them off. We're looking at Colorado, Nevada, Alaska, of course, Delaware last night, Kentucky. You could make the case Florida. And you're saying, okay, well, they can win certainly in a primary election where there's a smaller group and in a lot of cases a more ideological group. Now the question is, can they broaden out and go after the moderates and the centrists who tend to make up a larger bulk of a general election? And so I think we watch that, and that's, I think, the case in all of those states going forward, and that's how you see if they're going to, in the end, I think, effectively win or lose this, perhaps, for the Republicans.
Now, a lot has been made of this so-called enthusiasm gap between Republicans and Democrats, the argument being that the Tea Party, while it hurts the GOP in a few particular races, also brings this kind of energy and enthusiasm to the midterms that might otherwise not be there and helps propel other candidates into office. On the other hand, is there a possibility that you'll see in the closing months, because you've done some polling on this, that Democrats have a surge in enthusiasm as well that's kind of stoked by the far-right leanings of some of these Tea Party candidates?
Sure. What you see, in a midterm election, you're talking about turnout lower than in a presidential, maybe in the high 30s, maybe 40-odd%. And, one of the things you watch is that the kind of voter the Democrats relied on a lot in 2008, and to some extent in 2006, younger, a lot of new voters especially, aren't the kind of voters who tend to turn out in midterms. So you take that and you apply it to the electorates in a lot of these states that are in play. Like I mentioned, the Colorados, the New Hampshire, the Nevadas. And you say, okay, well, what does the electorate look like without those voters in there? And clearly, I think the Democrats will be at a little disadvantage if they can't mobilize a lot of those voters again. Midterm electorates tend to be a little older, a little more conservative often, and so that's where I think the big question comes, to the point about mobilization going forward.
Getting back to Delaware for a minute, the reason that this stung so badly for the GOP is that they consider Delaware to be an easy pickup in the fall, and this was sort of one of the states that they thought that they had locked up in this 10-state strategy that they had to try to take back the Senate. Now that Delaware is in doubt for them, do they have another path to getting to 10 seats in the Senate? That's the number they'd need to reclaim it?
They have a path. Obviously, it gets harder. What I think they need to do to get to 10 is certainly take some of the blue states, if you will, that are in play but seem to have an edge for the Democrats. You look at Connecticut, where Mark Blumenthal is trying to hold that seat. It was Chris Dodd's seat there. That's a pretty blue state. He may have an edge there, but Linda McMahon is going to spend a lot of money. You look at West Virginia, where a popular governor in Joe Manchin is going to try and hold what was Robert Byrd's seat. Those are the kinds of states now that this development in Delaware last night puts back into focus, perhaps, for the Republicans. They're probably going to have to really make a push at one or both of those, because then when you get through the rest of the country, some of the states that are in play. Now, the good news for Democrats, for Republicans, is that they have the Democrats on defense in a lot of those states. California, Washington, where longtime incumbents are facing strong Republican challengers. Wisconsin is another one. Now the Republicans have to go then and win all, if not most, if not all of those states going forward to make the 10. So you can certainly see how they would pick up gains, but they're going to have a very, very good night now, minus the Delaware, if that in fact they don't win there, to actually get the 10 they need to go to a majority. That's what makes it fun.
It makes it fun. It makes for a lot of long nights. Anthony Salvanto of CBS News, thanks so much for joining us to break it all down.
Thanks, Nancy.
Sure thing. And thank you for watching Washington Unplugged. You can join us here every day on CBSNews.com. I'm Nancy Cordes. Have a great day. See you later.
We don't expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you